Today I effed up by masturbating in front of the nurses in the hospital while waking up from anesthetic. I am definitely going to delete this later. I'm posting this under my Anon account for a reason. I'm just hoping that maybe there are some other people here who've done something similar, or nurses that can tell me worse stories from their work to make me feel better about myself. Or at least maybe a little mockery will help turn this from a humiliating story to a funny one. Today I had an egg retrieval operation in the hospital as part of an egg donation. This is a surgical procedure in which a needle is inserted into the vaginal wall to the ovary, collecting mature eggs to be fertilized. While normally you only have one, injections are administered for about 2 weeks beforehand to increase the number of eggs matured in one cycle. In my case there were about 25 eggs. The retrieval is done under anesthetic, which I'm going to blame for all my poor decisions. Everything was going swimmingly until I woke up. For about 10 minutes I was totally fine. Then I felt like absolute shit. I've done this once before but it didn't hurt this bad. It felt like period pain, if you were having 25 particularly bad periods all at once. The cramps were so bad one of the first things I did once it hit was roll over and throw up, though that could have actually been the nausea from the anesthetic, I am not sure. There was an 4 in my left arm, so I didn't want to curl up on my left on top of it, and I tried to curl up on my right, but that left my left arm in very uncomfortable position too, so I opted to roll into the fetal position while lying on my back, that is, with my knees lifted in the air up against my chest and my calves and feet hovering parallel to the bed. This did help with the pain a little. What I realized later when recreating this position at home later is it's very difficult to get the blanket to actually cover your backside entirely like this, and the hospital blankets were not that big, so I'm reasonably sure that in trying to alleviate my pain I was also displaying my ass and genitals to all of the attending staff, 3 nurses, and possibly others in the recovery room as well. One of the nurses went to fetch some kind of opioid to help with the pain. While that was happening, I was acutely aware of the intense ache in my vulva and pelvis. For the men in the subreddit who are not in the know, masturbating helps with period pain, and I was still reasonably sure that the blanket was covering me entirely and nobody would know. So in my delirious state I decided to rub the offending anatomy to try and reduce the pain. One of the nurses closed the curtain surrounding me and then he told me he was going to get me a second blanket for warmth. When he returned with it he placed it a little lower over my body, covering my lower body and legs. I didn't really put what this meant together until later. To their credit, they took it very well and didn't actually say anything, and it is possible they didn't see it, but reflecting on their reactions and the chain of events in clear-eyed hindsight I'm pretty sure they did. To be fair, if any of them were present for the surgical procedure they would have seen me while I was unconscious as well, but it's a different thing when I'm awake and, well, you know. Anyway, now I'm recovering in bed at home. The pain has went away but the embarrassment has only increased. At least I humiliated myself for a good cause, and I'll probably never see these people again. Too long, didn't read, was in pain and woozy after an operation in hospital, may or may not have masturbated in front of the nurses. My last procedure, I don't remember coming to the first time, talked to the doctor, no recollection, and then passed out again. When I actually started to come to and started to get wheeled out, the nurse in saying goodbye said, "Thanks for the show." What does that mean? What does that mean? I never got an explanation, but it must have been something embarrassing. I'm short, don't worry about it as it is probably far from the worst those nurses have ever witnessed. When I was coming back up from one of my surgeries, I became lucid in the middle of a sentence. The nurse was looking kinda grim, and I had a very strong impression I had just been saying something really bad, in a deep, dark secret sort of way. I asked the nurse what I had just told her, and she said, "I'm not going to tell you." She left the room and a different nurse finished my discharge. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what I might have said. Having seen the vid of the girl crying about how no one even cares that no one does the YMCA anymore after dental anesthetic, I suspect they did you a favor, but also that it may not have been nearly as deep as you thought. I hope it's not as bad as I think. Because it sure felt like I was telling secrets so deep even I didn't know about them. And I guess I still don't, haha. Some nurses don't belong in recovery. Sounds like you had the misfortune of meeting one. My friend had a hysterectomy and was coming to in recovery. The nurse asked her how she was feeling and she replied, "It hurts like shit." She wasn't even the type of person to swear much, but she was loopy. The nurse apparently scolded her for swearing and told her not to do that. Because of her vulnerable state and coming out of anesthesia, she just started crying and kept crying until she got out of recovery. I'm still mad at that nurse on her behalf. ICU nurse here, you definitely aren't the first person to do something of this nature. You'd be shocked at the amount of crazy things people do post-op. Same, I had a patient that hooked his Xbox up to the TV and decided to watch porn all night and crank it. It was an interesting shift. That's quite the power move, honestly. The only time I had to be fully sedated for a medical procedure, I kept forgetting to breathe when I was coming out of the anesthesia. I was laying in the bed recovering and would occasionally hear a really loud alarm going off, and then a nurse would come and tell me I needed to keep breathing. Happened about 3 times in a row. Anesthesia is weird. This happened to a coworker of mine. But they just put his wife in the room and told her to keep reminding him to breathe. They were both in their early 20s at the time, and she said later it was the most terrified she's ever been. I don't know if he had an alarm hooked up or not. If it makes you feel any better, I woke up from fibroid, uterus, surgery and knew I was going to have a bad recovery. Felt that sweaty grey skin feeling. Nurses kinda fobbed me off and asked me to get dressed. I got stuck halfway off the bed, in huge abdominal discomfort. Finally got the nurse's attention, just in time to let out the longest, loudest fart of my life. I was like a big balloon deflating, without that flying around the room's part. Must have been about 12 full seconds of continuous fart. Epic. At least they started to believe me that things weren't all hunky-dory. I'm sure your efforts didn't even make the top 10 stories from that day, OP. Just block it from your mind. I'm laughing at the image of you waving down a nurse for the sole purpose of sharing your masterpiece of a fart with them. Oh, nurse? Nurse! Come hither so that I may play, to thee and thine, mine ode to your profession that I have just now composed, played upon an instrument of mine own design. You didn't assault anyone and you were coming out of anesthesia. So it's a wash to the nursing staff. I remember coming to after the GA from my dental surgery. My mouth was packed full of gauze and blood, and my first thought is that someone was trying to suffocate me, so naturally I start swinging. Thankfully they had better reflexes than me, and I don't think I actually connected. Those poor nurses having to deal with me when I was convinced they were trying to kill me. It was 20 years ago and I still feel horrible about it. I was having a baby. I was in full labor and the baby was moving into position and almost crowning. The OBGYN had her fingers inside me and her thumb on my vulva. The thumb was resting on my clitoris and it felt amazing. Suddenly the waves of horrible pain turned to pleasure. I moaned, "That feels great." My husband and the nurses all laughed, but the doctor didn't. She did, however, remove her hand pretty quickly. How rude could have countered the pain? Truth. She left me hanging. I had the most intense orgasm of my life while giving birth, and I didn't find out that orgasmic birth was a real thing until I looked it up later. I will go to my grave never telling my son about this. When I woke up from anesthesia, I kept telling everyone I could, "I'm crazy now. I'm crazy now. I'm crazy now." I remember waking up and not being able to think correctly. I could not understand where I was, the world that I was in, or even what I was. So I wanted these other beings around me to explain what was happening to me, but all I could get out was, "I'm crazy now." Because that was the biggest thought that kept taking over my hindered brain. The weirdest thing that stands out the most to me, having watched thousands of people wake up from general anesthesia, was this. A man was absolutely lucid like 3 minutes after being extubated, held his chart in his hands, it was on his lap, and truth be told, was an impressively thick chart, and expressed how profound it was that this binder was a physical representation of all he had been through. The weirdest thing was a person acting normally. Hi, I work in PACU. We cover up naked people every day after anesthesia. Many start thrashing about as they wake up exposing themselves. It's a daily event, we just cover you and move on. Just another day for those nurses and they've already forgotten, I'm sure.